Yep, finally having the opportunity to talk about Tales of Arise. As a fairly long-time Tales fan, this game leaves a lot to be desired, but at the same time, it has a lot to provide. And I don't really know how I feel on it. But I'm going to try and put my feelings to thoughts into words, and we'll go from there. Because of the fact that I'm wholly unprepared, I'm only doing this with a guideline script, and I'm trying to keep this as raw as possible, so everything I say just sounds natural, and same with the editing. I could care less about it right now. My goal is just to put my thoughts out there because I'm very passionate about the series and I want it to do well, but I feel like in order for it to do well, it's gonna have to make some changes. But Tales of Arise is a good start to that. I think it's a good game. I think it has great moments. I think it has terrible moments. And this is coming from a first time playthrough of about 80 hours, doing most of the side content except the end game. Post game, I guess. But played on hard mode because I'm a masochist like that. But boy howdy. I will go ahead and give a fair warning and say that this video is going to contain some minor spoilers. It may contain major spoilers as well, but I'm going to try to warn before I go into that so people know to skip a little bit if they're trying to avoid the major plot points. My goal with this is just to discuss how I feel, not a full review of the game itself, just opinions. But starting with opinions, the best place to start talking about Arise is going to be with its world building. I feel like there's a lot of lore to be established that the game does well between Rena, Dana, and its people, and the 300 years since the two came into contact, and it puts the player in a perfect position where they don't know much of anything, so they have everything to learn. You don't really go into it knowing this, that, and the other. I feel like Tales games are really good at doing that, and Tales of Arise is of no exception to that rule. If I had any complaints about the world building, I would say that I think it doesn't give enough of the Renan side of the story, and getting to see Renan locales, but with it being two planets involved rather than two countries or two nations or anything of that sort, it does make sense why there's that kind of divide, especially considering the nature of the story. But if anyone's played a JRPG before, you know you're going to visit Ren at some point, as well as Lenegis, and I think the game does that perfectly, but we could have had a little bit more than what we got, in my opinion at least. Next up, I feel like I would be doing a disservice if I didn't take a great amount of time talking about the characters of the game. I think the cast, both playable and non-playable, are probably some of the strongest that the series has seen. This is another thing that most Tales fans are going to know very well. As far as I'm aware, from every Tales game that I've played, the cast has always been a bright, shining star for every game. The characters are the key, and Arise does it perfectly. Every character feels like they have their own stories, but they also have their own flaws and what they contribute to the overall plot. No character ever feels inessential. It doesn't feel like a character doesn't contribute at any point, and I've got no real complaints besides Rinwell being kind of tough to deal with for a good half of the game. starting off strong with Iron Mask himself. Alphen is cool. I don't think he's the coolest protag we've seen in the series, but I think in the terms of the story, he has a lot of strong moments. I'm not a huge fan of the whole amnesiac angle that these games always try and push, but it fits so well within the plot of the game, and they give such a good reason for it that I can't even really be mad about it. Next up, we gotta talk about Shionne. Every one of these games has a best girl, and I think Shionne is probably the best girl for this game. Kisara being a close second. Anyone who picks Renwell is probably sus. But, hey, I'm a sucker for girls with snipers, with bad attitudes. That's my fault. But she plays really well into the story. She's a central part throughout, and frankly, I have no other wishes for her besides maybe opening up her shell a little bit sooner than she does. But just like with Alphen, it makes total sense why, especially with those thorns. Hard to be personal when you've got that going on. I'm pairing up Renwell and Law because I feel like my thoughts about them go hand in hand with one another. Renwell is interesting. She goes through this major plot point that changes her entire character pretty drastically. She starts off cold and ends like she's part of the team. And somewhere in there, I felt complete and utter annoyance at her because, I mean, you can only say you hate Renan so many times when you're traveling with Renan, and it feel stupid. But she turns around, she gets better, and from the point that she starts getting better, it does progress, and she ends up as one of my not favorite mages. Rita still holds that title, but she's still pretty great. And Law, I think dude's great. He is the broske of this game. Every single time I see him on screen, every time I play as him, every time I see him in the story, he is doing something that I like. And sure, he's got daddy complex with Zephyr and everything, but it's understandable. And who wouldn't be? I mean, his dad's pretty badass. That said, the two really help play off of each other and build each other up in ways that other games would have had Rita and Carol bickering until pretty much the end of the game. Or, shoot, I'm having trouble thinking of another combo, but that's the sense I'm getting. They don't feel like they just hate each other. They actually do have moments where they build each other up and get better for it. And they are actually responsible for Renwell's growth midway through the game, which is great because it feels like a family, which this game really tries to push that motif. Also, I have to mention, Renwell brings along Hootle, who is the best series mascot I have met so far, and die for Hootle. Hootle is awesome. Anyway, Kisara, number 2 best girl, maybe number 1 on a terrible day, but she's pretty great. She's the embodiment of the Man I Love Fishing MILF t-shirt, and what more could a guy ask for, honestly? She uses big shield instead of big sword. That's a pretty fun little change. I don't know if any other series cast member has used a shield as a main weapon before, but she uses it, and she uses it like a boss. She also acts as the mom of the group, I guess would be the aptest way to describe her, because most of the time she is just in here reining in the kids, or even Alphen and Shionne at times. and every single time she does, it's pretty damn hilarious. But ultimately, I would probably say she's playing the least part of the story, but she has a lot of personal adventures that it makes sense. What she doesn't get through the main story, she does get through her own personal story. And that's enough for me, personally. Last but not least, we have Mr. Earthlord himself, Dohalim. You go into it thinking, hey, I'm gonna kill all the lords, and then you make friends with the third one and everything gets all topsy-turvy from there. But he's cool. He's pretty depressed for half the damn game from when you get him. Reasonably so, just like with most things I'm seeing with this game. But, again, he gets better, especially if he's talking about a little Don Drum boy. But he's definitely the eccentric type. He's probably the character that most people are either going to love him, or they are like, please get this man off my screen. Thankfully, I'm of the opinion that he's pretty cool, even though he's nerdy for all the weirdest things. But the fact that they bring out a Renin and say, hey, even though he's a lord, he loves Ganon things. I think that does a lot for the rest of the cast, whereas this is a point in time where they're still gung-ho about killing all the Renin lords and hating the Renins, and this dude shows up and he's an absolute geek. It's a pretty good way of changing people's minds, and it helps that his country slash city slash nation, whatever they describe them as, I forget, is probably the most peaceful and most well off. So he has that going for him at least. And as for other important characters, Zephyr, he's great, he's cool, Dilfworthy. Shame what happens. I hate to break it to you, he's not gonna stick around for very long. Whoops. All the other lords, they're pretty cool. They all have their own unique motivations with the crown contest. Some of them could be cool. Some of them are absolute psychopaths. But that's about what you'd expect. And the resistance groups are all unique. They don't ever really play a huge part, but they do have their own stances when talking to them, just walking around, that help establish the lore of each nation and how it works. And there's a lot to be learned just from talking to these random faceless people. And with all of that out of the way, we can finally get into the whole meat of this conversation. Starting with the story, I think it's good. I think it's cliched a little bit with Alphen's memory loss, the whole slavery bit, and everything else going on. That said, I think with all the characters and world building that they do, I think the story plays out pretty well. I guess I could complain that you spend a little too much of it doing what one would expect to be doing at the beginning of a Tales game, and you don't really get a lot of the Tales tropes involved. You see the fire elemental towards the beginning of the game, and then at the end of the game. You don't really get the four spirits, which is a confusing part of everything, I guess. But I don't think this game needs it, per se. It would have been nice to see them play a little bit more of a part, but it's also not necessary in the slightest. I will say this game does have a much heavier tone than your usual Tales game, though, with all that in mind, but it does know how to take itself a little less seriously thanks to the skits, which I enjoyed a lot of them, and they, of course, changed the skit style. People are very mixed on that. I'm of the opinion that I think it's a good change. I think with the more heavy use of the models, being able to use them in more expressive ways and show more detail in these little skits is a nice change. And especially when coming from Symphonia, where everyone's just the moving picture frames again, but they're not even voice acted, and that's not a problem, but it's frustrating for someone like me who always plays with dubs or just likes to hear more of the characters talk. As I said before, you spend a lot of this game on Dana, and I mean a lot, but it makes sense. I do wish we got a little bit more on leaving Dana, but I can't be too mad because what they give us is pretty damn good. On that same note, I feel like the side quests in this game are some of the weakest that I have seen in any Tales game. Now that we have this sort of mission format of the quests and side quests, I feel like it just takes away. You get these characters and you meet them and they pull out the Sonic 06, hey, and then, yeah, you just sit there and you go collect rocks or feathers or kill a Zoogle, and it's just rinse and repeat. There's no real rhyme or reason to why or when you do these things, and all you really get are some pretty meaningless trinkets for a heavy majority of the side quests, and that's kind of lame. It's really lame, actually. I mean, this is coming hot off the heels of games like Berseria, Vesperia Definitive Edition, where these side quests are interwoven into every location you visit, and then you go back, and then this person is doing this now. It's crazy. And then in Arise, you get, this dude tried on a new outfit, and Shionne said it's ugly, and that's the side quest. And that's pretty much the most engaging side quest. It's kind of sad. Thankfully, there is a lot more to do than side quests in the game. The exploration is pretty good. I mean, you utilize your characters in ways to traverse the environment, and the dungeon design is pretty neat most of the time, barring some of the Lord dungeons, because it's just a game of find the elevator. How does the elevator work? Oh, we have to unlock the elevator. But it makes up for it with all the little owls, all the items, all the things you can find. That's great. But it's hard to ask for more when it comes to a JRPG. But again, this is where it's more limited by its linear-ish path, because Berseria, you can go explore all these little dungeons, and Vesperia, you can do the same thing. Even Symphonia, you get all these little dungeons. And this one, you kind of just get railroaded into the next plot point, and you don't really have any other side content you can do, and that's what it is at this point. I can't call it sad for the 17th time in a row, so we'll just go with leaves much to be desired. Not to mention, you don't even really revisit places twice, like in other JRPGs. Most of the time, if you visit a place once, that's the only time you're going to have to go there. Medencia, you finish up there, and unless you're doing a side quest, it's really not necessary again, and it's strange, to say the least. Thankfully, where this game lacks with the open world exploration, it does make up with the combat. It pulls the arts gauge system from Berseria and refines on it to a point where combat becomes addictive almost, as long as you're able to actually guard break. And that leads me to the whole break gauge system. I like it, but it does introduce a flaw with the enemy design. You go to a new area, and you find their wolf, you find their wasp, you find their bird, and it's like, oh, I know what to do with this situation, and it just continues. You never really get tested to see hey, does this enemy have any new weaknesses? Is it not weak to something now? The only time I can think of is during one of the later game dungeons. You meet golem enemies again, but this time they're actually armored, so you have to hit them with law first, and that's probably about as deep as it goes. Otherwise, you just meet a new enemy and you know exactly how to deal with them from the moment you fight them. It's pretty simple, but it is what it is. Thankfully, the boss fights are pretty good in that they always try and mix things up when they can. There's probably a few boss fights where you can absolutely cheese them just from utilizing their weaknesses, and that makes the whole break system feel great, because as long as you can manage the gauge and then manage everything else, you can pretty much keep a boss down for most of the fight if you manage it well enough. That is until they go into overlimit and cast a wide range attack and kill your entire party in one hit. No thank you, Fifth Lord. If there's anything I wish those bosses did more, is provide us with more opportunities for unique breaks, unique opportunities to insert a QuickTime command and interrupt attacks. I will say my favorite interaction in that mode of thinking is probably during, the Fourth Lord. Rinwell can actually interrupt her mystic art, and that's pretty badass. And yet, no other point in this game, to my knowledge, that's ever done. Again, it's pretty weird that was the time that they thought that would work, and then never used that idea again. Something I'm going completely off script to mention is that the typical Tales systems are practically gone, however. You finish a fight and you get your grade, you get your SP, all that stuff. You don't get gold. You don't win gold from fights anymore. And it makes it to where it feels like you're broke for a lot of the game, and you're struggling to make money unless you have item drop items on, and just constantly getting item drops, which you're relying on RNG to make your money, when in past games you could just fight a group of enemies that you know drop a lot of money, or even just the same enemies multiple times, and at least you know you're making an income, and then selling the materials on top of that. But in this game, it's completely absent, so you're stuck relying on finding gold from chests, or happening to get enough materials so you could sell them all, and then that takes away from the crafting systems, which are also great, albeit I think the accessories are a little too deep, and you don't unlock the ability to modify that until after you beat the first half. Anyways, it's strange, and then grade doesn't really matter anymore either. I hate to break it to you, but when you finish this game, you're not going to have the grade shop, at least as far as I'm aware, which leads me to wonder, what's the point of having it anymore? What's the point of telling me I'm going to get 3 times my grade and get plus 350 grade if I can't even buy stuff with it? It's ridiculous. I do like that they changed that around and make it to where those little artifacts that Dohalim collects are acting as that, but it still leaves me to wonder, why are these things not here, or why do they not play a part? I will take a moment to briefly mention also the fact that you only get 6 characters throughout this game, and not even a surprise 7th, is not demoralizing, but it feels strange to have such a small party and it never shift much at all. You get a moment in time where you don't have access to one of your party members, so you're left with 5, but that's really the only time you're left hanging, in a sense. otherwise, for most of the game, you have the same 6, and it's constantly access to the same 6, and it's weird. I really feel like they could have thrown a wrench in there somewhere, have Law get taken out, or something. Like, throw me for a loop here. Do something different besides just keeping the same group together constantly. I don't hate it, but at the same time, knowing other Tales games are infamous for it, seeing it out of play in this game is weird. And titles, they actually play a much bigger part now outside of changing an outfit here or just providing a little snippet of text. They actually provide you with skills, which, I mean, I love me some skills. Don't get me wrong. And it's nice to see these important parts of Tales games where it's like, you unlocked a title actually means something, because you can actually get more bars on your arts gauge, a new art in itself. It feels like you're actually growing from doing the minimal amount of side quests that you have available to you. And that's pretty cool. Albeit the rewards from those quests themselves can eat grass. All that rambling, and it was all to avoid this topic. The specs, the technical stuff. Game looks and runs pretty damn well. I don't have many complaints on it, albeit I think I did notice a few moments where the frame rate was kinda choppy, but not to the point where it felt terrible. And the world and all the different countries, nations, cities, whatever, they all look fucking beautiful. And it just continues. Everything in the game looks great. I mean, you see a fish? God, that fish looks good. You see a plate of food. That thing looks delicious too. Hey, like, you see a monster and you're like, ew, this thing's disgusting, get it out of my face immediately. Yeah, it works too, unless it's the giant chameleon, in which case you're going to be seeing that one for a while, so get used to seeing it. The voice acting is great. I didn't have a single point in time where I was frustrated with how a character was voice acted. The music is pretty damn banger too. Fuck me. I will say, it's really frustrating to see the subtitle job be so totally ignored, however. It's like they ran the script through Google Translate and just copy-pasted what they got from that into the game. And it shows. There are times where someone will use an art and they'll actually say something, even though that art is named something completely different. I think half of Shionne's arts are actually like this. And the subtitles between the skits, story beats, one of the most major story beats in the entire game has a typo in it. And it's just so jarring to see that. You would really think for one of their blockbuster series, Bamco would have put a little bit more time and effort into making sure a simple part of the game isn't an embarrassment. Not that it plays a huge part, but I can only look at the typos for so long before I'm really wondering if they put a human on this job. It's frustrating, and it sucks to see one of my favorite series not get the love I feel it should. But whatever, that's all I got on the technical standpoint at least. Thankfully, I do think there's a silver lining here. Arise does a lot to bolster the series. I think the skits are great. I still think Berseria's combat is great. The graphics and the world design and the characters are all still great. but there's just so many blemishes. The DLC stuff, I don't even think I mentioned the whole $18 background music pack for the battles and all the costume packs. And it's like, why is any of this necessary? I think the most egregious is the fact that a lot of people consider the experience gain in this game to be so slow, and their solution is a DLC item that raises experience gain by, I'm forgetting, but I think it's like 200%? I didn't buy it for the sake of this whole rant, but if I was playing this game again, I would buy that in a heartbeat, just so I could feel like I'm actually keeping up pace-wise, rather than having to sit in the area and grind. Because Lord save you if you absolutely get to the last dungeon and you're level 45. Because you're gonna get your ass beat, just like I did. And you have to go and grind for probably 4 to 5 hours on whatever the strongest enemies you can find were, which for me, they were like basic slimes, which sucks. I really wanted to be doing the main story, and instead, I'm grinding for levels, which the game never really made me feel like I needed to do. I hate it. I hate that much. That said, again, I think there's a lot to build off of. It's already been confirmed that there's no plans for an Arise 2, which sucks, because Bamco's allergic to exploring sequels unless it's Xillia or Symphonia. And hey, I get it. They establish a happy ending, move on. It's great. At least we can pull a lot of the good from this game outside of this specific cast and world and transplant it into a new game, which I hope fixes up some of the stuff that I'm frustrated with. As for my final thoughts on the game, I think Tales of Arise is a good, maybe even a great game. Honestly, it ranks in some of my favorite Tales games so far, but it leaves a lot to be desired, and if you're new to the series, or even if you're a returning player, I think you should go into it expecting there to be some rough patches. I think if you can afford it, maybe even pay a little bit of that extra cash, go get that EXP drop item, just to make your life a little bit easier. Don't even use it most of the time, because I think the game's fair, but just when you go to grind, or when you start feeling a level slump, turn it on. It's gonna save you a lot more trouble in the long run, trust me. Trust me. But, hey, for my biggest complaints to be typos and weird pacing and EXP gains, I mean, these are all nitpicks at the end of the day. But I think the core game is still pretty damn good. And it's worth a play if you've got 80 hours to spare. Anyhoodle, I think that's about all I got. I could go into major story territory with the final dungeon and the post-game that I did experience, but in the interest of keeping this video under 40 minutes, I think it's better off that I cut it off here. So, hey, that's Yuki signing off to go play Elden Ring, sleep, eat hot chip, and lie. See ya.